Let me craft an engaging, natural first part of this story in simple English that captures readers' attention while staying within appropriate content boundaries. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow across the hospital's emergency entrance as a young girl pushed through the heavy glass doors, clutching something precious against her chest. Her small frame, barely that of a 12-year-old, trembled with each step. The bundle in her arms, wrapped in what appeared to be a thin white blanket, stirred slightly. The night shift staff at Memorial Hospital had seen their share of unusual cases, but this made them stop in their tracks. The young black girl, wearing a worn school uniform and scuffed sneakers, held what was unmistakably a newborn baby. A white infant with rosy cheeks and wisps of blonde hair. I need help," she whispered, her voice quavering. The night nurse behind the reception desk quickly abandoned her paperwork and rushed forward. The girl's dark eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion, yet there was a determination in her stance that spoke volumes about her character. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Other patients in the waiting area watched in stunned silence as medical staff quickly gathered around. The contrast between the young girl and the infant she carried created a picture that raised countless questions, but the immediate focus was on ensuring both children were safe. "Sweetheart, come with me," the head nurse said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. Leading her away from the curious stares of onlookers, they entered a quiet examination room. The girl's school uniform was neat but worn, suggesting a family that cared but struggled to make ends meet. Her hair was styled in careful braids, though some had come loose, framing a face that seemed too young to bear such adult worries. The baby, when carefully examined, appeared to be only a few days old. While the young girl refused to let go of the infant at first, she gradually began to trust the medical staff. Her protective instincts were clear. Whenever someone approached the baby, her eyes would follow their every move. As the night unfolded, the emergency room buzzed with whispered conversations. Security guards kept curious onlookers at bay, while medical staff worked to piece together this puzzling situation. The young girl sat on the examination bed, her posture straight despite her obvious exhaustion, watching over the baby as doctors performed routine checks. The social worker who arrived noticed something remarkable. Despite the girl's young age, she demonstrated an incredible sense of responsibility. She had carefully wrapped the baby to keep it warm, and even remembered to support its head properly. These weren't the actions of someone who had acted rashly or without thought. Outside the hospital windows, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky. Inside, this young girl's arrival had set in motion a chain of events that would uncover a story far bigger than anyone in that emergency room could have imagined. The night shift staff, who had started their evening expecting a routine shift, now found themselves at the beginning of what would become one of the most remarkable cases in the hospital's history. As word spread through the hospital corridors, more staff members found reasons to pass by the examination room, each catching a glimpse of the young girl who had shown such extraordinary courage. Her tired eyes remained alert, watching everything that happened around her, while her small hands never strayed far from the baby she had brought to safety. The true mystery wasn't just about how this young girl came to be caring for this infant. It was about the circumstances that had brought them together and the story that was yet to unfold. As the night deepened, one thing became clear to everyone who encountered them. This was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would touch hearts and change lives throughout the community. Inside the quiet examination room, the young girl finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though her eyes never left the baby. The head nurse, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a neat bun, gently placed a warm blanket around the girl's shoulders. It was clear that gaining her trust would take patience and understanding. "Can you tell us your name, sweetheart?" the nurse asked softly, keeping her voice calm and steady. The girl hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. After what seemed like an eternity, she whispered her response, so quietly they had to lean in to hear it. The name she gave was simple and sweet, fitting for a 12-year-old who should have been worrying about homework rather than caring for a newborn. As the medical team examined the baby, they noticed how meticulously the infant had been cared for despite the unusual circumstances. The baby's clothes, though simple, were clean. There were even traces of baby lotion on its skin, suggesting someone had been providing proper care. This detail would later become a crucial piece of the puzzle. A social worker arrived, a woman wearing a navy blue blazer who carried a warm leather notebook. She had handled many cases involving children over her 20-year career, but something about this one felt different. Instead of launching straight into questions, she pulled up a chair and simply sat with the girl, creating a space where silence felt comfortable rather than pressuring. Meanwhile, the hospital staff noticed something peculiar about the girl's backpack. Alongside her school books were carefully packed baby supplies, diapers, wipes, and even a small container of formula. This wasn't a split-second decision or a random occurrence. The level of preparation suggested forethought and planning. The girl's exhaustion began to show more clearly as the night wore on. Dark circles under her eyes hinted at sleepless nights, yet she remained alert, especially whenever someone approached the baby. When offered food, she accepted a sandwich but ate it with one hand, keeping the other protectively near the infant's bassinet. As the social worker began gentle questioning, the girl's responses revealed glimpses of a larger story. She spoke of her neighborhood, of houses she visited after school, of conversations overheard and situations that didn't seem quite right. Each answer led to more questions, creating a picture that grew more complex with every detail shared. The hospital's security team had been quietly conducting their own assessment, reviewing camera footage and speaking with staff who had witnessed the girl's arrival. They noticed she had taken a careful route through the hospital, avoiding main entrances and choosing less crowded corridors. This wasn't random. She had clearly planned her approach. Outside the examination room, hospital staff went about their regular duties, but there was a tangible sense that something significant was unfolding. Nurses exchanged meaningful glances, doctors hobbled in quiet consultation, and even the custodial staff seemed to find reasons to pass by more frequently than usual. The social worker's notebook gradually filled with notes, each detail potentially important to understanding the full scope of the situation. The girl's descriptions of certain neighborhoods, specific houses, and particular adults began to form a pattern that raised serious concerns among the professionals involved. As dawn approached, casting a soft glow through the hospital windows, the young girl finally allowed herself to doze off in the comfortable chair provided for her. The baby slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her, both under the watchful eyes of the medical staff. The night shift workers, preparing to hand over to their day shift colleagues, knew they had witnessed the beginning of something that would have far-reaching consequences. The social worker made her final notes before stepping out to make some urgent phone calls. The information gathered through the night suggested connections to other recent cases in the city, patterns that had been subtle but were now becoming clearer. The arrival of this brave young girl and the baby she protected might be the key to understanding something much larger than anyone had initially suspected. As the morning shift began to arrive, they were quietly briefed on the situation. The story of the young girl and the baby had already begun spreading through hospital channels, drawing attention from various departments. Everyone understood that the next few days would be crucial in unraveling the mystery that had walked through their doors the night before. The morning sun filtered through the hospital windows as a female detective from the Special Victims Unit arrived. She carried herself with quiet confidence, wearing a dark blazer and comfortable shoes that spoke of long days spent on her feet. Her approach was deliberately casual as she entered the room where the young girl and baby were resting. The detective had been carefully chosen for this case. She had a reputation for connecting with young witnesses and handling sensitive situations with exceptional care. As she settled into a chair near the girl, she didn't immediately pull out her notebook or badge. Instead, she simply started a conversation about ordinary things, school, favorite subjects, and what the hospital breakfast was like. Gradually, the girl began to open up. She spoke about her life after school, how she had started babysitting for various families in the wealthier part of town. Her voice grew softer as she described the big houses with their perfectly manicured lawns and the strange patterns she had noticed over time. Some houses had different babies each time she visited, while others had rooms that were always locked. The detective listened intently, her experienced eyes catching every subtle change in the girl's expression. When the girl mentioned certain addresses, the detective's fingers tapped quietly on her knee, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the social worker standing nearby. These addresses matched locations that had come up in other investigations. As the morning progressed, more details emerged about the baby. The girl explained how she had noticed something wasn't right during her last babysitting job. The adults in the house had been acting strangely, making hurried phone calls in whispered voices, and she had overheard conversations that made her uncomfortable. Her instincts, remarkably sharp for someone so young, had told her something was seriously wrong. The baby had been left in her care one afternoon, with strict instructions not to leave a particular room. But when she heard the adults arguing about moving the merchandise and clearing the house, she knew she had to act. Drawing on courage far beyond her years, she had waited until the right moment, gathered some supplies, and left with the baby. In the hospital room, the detective and social worker exchanged glances. The girl's story was filling in blanks from multiple ongoing investigations. Her observations, described with the unfiltered honesty of youth, provided crucial details that adult witnesses had either missed or been afraid to report. The hospital's child life specialist joined them, bringing some art supplies. As the girl drew pictures of the houses she had visited, more details emerged. She sketched floor plans with remarkable accuracy, marking the rooms that had seemed off-limits, and the windows she had noticed were always covered. Her memory for detail was extraordinary, each drawing adding another piece to the growing puzzle. Outside the room, a team of investigators was quietly assembling. Phone calls were made, databases searched, and connections drawn between the girl's account and other reports that had seemed unrelated until now. The baby's description matched that of an infant reported missing from another state, though confirmation would require more than just physical similarities. The girl's own family had been located and contacted. Her mother, a hard-working woman who often worked double shifts, had been frantically searching for her daughter since the previous evening. When she arrived at the hospital, her relief at finding her daughter safe quickly turned to pride as she learned of her child's brave actions. The detective continued her gentle questioning, now with the mother present for support. The girl seemed to draw strength from her mother's presence, sharing more details about what she had observed during her time babysitting. She described cars that would arrive late at night, people speaking in languages she didn't understand, and the way some of the children she babysat never seemed to have any personal belongings. As lunchtime approached, the hospital staff noticed how protective the girl remained of the baby, even with her mother there. She had formed a bond with the infant during their brief time together, understanding somehow that they were both part of something bigger than themselves. Her actions, born of instinct and courage, were becoming the key to unraveling a mystery that had baffled law enforcement for months. The investigation was gaining momentum, but everyone involved knew they needed to proceed carefully. The girl's safety was paramount, and the information she provided needed to be handled with utmost discretion. As the detective made her final notes for this session, she couldn't help but marvel at how this young girl's bravery might help bring justice to families they didn't even know existed yet. The afternoon brought a flurry of quiet but intense activity to the hospital wing. As the young girl finally felt secure enough to share more details, her story revealed something far more disturbing than anyone had initially suspected. The detective sat patiently, her face remaining calm even as the girl's words painted a picture of a sophisticated operation hidden behind suburban facades. The girl described how she had first noticed something was wrong when she overheard a phone conversation while babysitting. She had been putting away toys in a playroom when voices drifted through the air vent from the basement below. The words she heard made little sense to her young mind, but she knew enough to understand that something wasn't right about babies being discussed like items in a store. She spoke about the day she found the baby, her voice growing stronger as she described the scene. The infant had been left alone in a room while the adults held a heated discussion downstairs. Through careful observation, she had noticed a pattern in their schedules, the times when the house would be least watched. With careful planning that belied her young age, she had chosen her moment. The detectives team, working from a separate room in the hospital, began connecting dots. The addresses the girl mentioned aligned perfectly with suspicious properties they'd been monitoring. Her descriptions of visitors matched surveillance photos they'd gathered over months of investigation, but it was her innocent observations, the kinds of details only a child would notice, that proved most valuable. She told them about the colorful sticky notes she'd seen on a desk calendar, each with different symbols that made no sense to her. The detective recognized them as a coding system used by trafficking networks. The girl's detailed memory of these small things was helping build a case that had eluded law enforcement for months. The baby, now sleeping peacefully in the hospital nursery, had become the key to unraveling something much bigger. Medical staff had discovered distinctive birthmarks that matched the description of an infant reported missing from a hospital 3 states away. The girl's decision to rescue this one baby was unknowingly pulling threads that would unravel an entire criminal enterprise. As afternoon turned to evening, more investigators arrived quietly at the hospital. They brought photographs, documents, and files, each piece of evidence finding its place in the larger picture the girl's story was helping to complete. Her simple observations about cars in driveways, delivery times, and visitors' patterns provided crucial timing information for the investigation. The girl's mother sat beside her daughter, holding her hand and fighting back tears as she realized the magnitude of what her child had uncovered. She had always taught her daughter to be observant and trust her instincts, but she never imagined these lessons would lead to something like this. Hospital staff continued their regular duties, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Security had been subtly increased, with plainclothes officers stationed throughout the building. The girl's safety had become a top priority as the implications of her discovery became clear. The detective showed the girl some photographs, carefully selected to avoid anything too disturbing. When the girl pointed to certain faces, identifying them as visitors to the houses where she babysat, the investigation team exchanged meaningful glances. These were suspects they'd been trying to connect to the case for months. As the girl described the layout of different houses she'd visited, an analyst created detailed floor plans based on her descriptions. Her remarkable memory for detail helped identify potential locations where other children might be held. Each piece of information she shared was another step toward bringing down a network that had operated in plain sight. The social worker, who had remained nearby throughout the day, noticed how the girl's demeanor had changed. The fear and uncertainty from the previous night had been replaced by a quiet determination. Despite her young age, she seemed to understand the importance of what she was doing. Late in the afternoon, the girl asked to see the baby one more time. Standing by the nursery window, she pressed her hand against the glass and smiled softly. Her simple act of courage in saving one infant was about to save many more. The detective, watching from a few steps away, felt a familiar surge of purpose. Cases like this reminded her why she had chosen this difficult line of work. As day 4 of this extraordinary story drew to a close, plans were being set in motion throughout the city. The girl's information had provided the missing pieces needed to take action. Tomorrow would bring major developments, but for now, she had done more than enough. It was time to let her rest and be just a 12-year-old girl again, at least for a little while. The early morning hours of the 5th day brought a carefully orchestrated series of events across the city. While the young girl slept peacefully in her hospital room, dozens of law enforcement officers prepared for synchronized raids. Her detailed information had given them exactly what they needed: timing, layouts, and patterns of movement at multiple locations. The girl's observations, initially about saving one baby, had unveiled a complex network. As dawn broke, police vehicles quietly surrounded several of the houses she had described. The wealthy neighborhoods, with their manicured lawns and expensive cars, seemed peaceful on the surface. But behind those perfect facades, the truth was about to emerge. Inside the hospital, the girl woke to find her mother still by her side. The detective arrived early, bringing breakfast and a gentle smile. She explained that many people were working to help other babies and children, all because of what the girl had noticed and reported. Though she kept the details age-appropriate, she wanted the young hero to understand the impact of her actions. Throughout the morning, reports began flowing back to the command center, set up in a quiet corner of the hospital. Each house the girl had mentioned revealed new evidence. In one home, investigators found a nursery with multiple cribs, each one recently emptied. Another house contained detailed records hidden behind a false wall, exactly where the girl had mentioned seeing adults disappear into what she thought was a closet. The most significant discovery came from the house where she had found the baby. Hidden cameras showed a steady stream of people coming and going over the past months. The girl's descriptions of visitors matched perfectly with the footage. Her memory for faces and details had been remarkably accurate, proving invaluable to the investigation. By midday, the scale of the operation became clear. The team had rescued several children, each case connecting back to the girl's careful observations. Her simple act of courage in saving one baby had created a domino effect, leading to the largest trafficking bust in the city's history. The social worker brought updates throughout the day, sharing age-appropriate details with the girl and her mother. Each piece of good news made the girl's eyes light up, especially when she learned that some of the other children she had seen while babysitting were now safe and being reunited with their families. Hospital staff who had been present on that first night stopped by throughout the day, each wanting to see the young girl who had set these events in motion. They'd brought small gifts, books, stuffed animals, and art supplies, but more importantly, they'd brought their thanks. Many had worked in healthcare for decades, but had never witnessed anything quite like this. In the afternoon, the baby's biological parents arrived at the hospital, having flown in after their infant was identified. The reunion was emotional, with tears of joy and endless gratitude toward the young girl who had saved their child. The girl watched from a distance, holding her mother's hand as the family she had helped create was reunited. The detective held a brief, private meeting with the girl and her mother. She explained that their lives might change for a while. There would be attention from the media, questions from many people, and some temporary changes to ensure their safety. But she assured them that they would have support every step of the way. As evening approached, the full impact of the day's events began to sink in. The number of children rescued had grown throughout the day. Each successful operation could be traced back to this one girl's careful observations and brave decision to act. Her simple choice to trust her instincts and protect one baby had unraveled an entire network of wrongdoing. The hospital staff prepared for the girl's discharge, knowing she would be moved to a secure location with her mother. Before leaving, she asked to visit the nursery one last time. Standing there, looking at the space where the baby she saved had been, she smiled softly. She couldn't fully understand the magnitude of what she had done, but she knew she had helped make things right. The day ended quietly, but its impact would be felt for years to come. As the girl and her mother prepared to leave the hospital, escorted by protective officers, the staff lined the hallways. There was no applause. This moment called for something more profound. Instead, they stood in respectful silence, honoring the young girl whose courage had changed so many lives. The story's impact rippled through the community like waves in a quiet pond. News of the 12-year-old girl's actions spread rapidly, though authorities carefully protected her identity. The local media focused on the incredible bravery of a child who noticed what many adults had overlooked, turning her neighborhood into the center of national attention. At the local community center, residents gathered to discuss how they could better protect their children. Parents shared stories of things their own kids had noticed but they had dismissed. The girl's actions had awakened something in the community, a reminder that sometimes the most important observations come from the most unexpected sources. The mayor called a special town meeting to address public safety concerns. The room was packed with concerned citizens, all eager to learn how such activities had gone unnoticed in their seemingly peaceful neighborhoods. The police chief spoke about new measures being implemented, many inspired by the young girl's careful observations. Local schools began implementing new safety awareness programs, teaching children to trust their instincts and speak up when something didn't feel right. Teachers noticed their students paying more attention to their surroundings, asking thoughtful questions about safety and responsibility. The girl's courage had created a ripple effect of awareness among her peers. The hospital where it all began saw changes too. Staff implemented new training programs focused on recognizing signs of trafficking. The emergency room nurse who first received the girl and baby that fateful night became an advocate for better screening protocols. Her experiences helped shape new guidelines for handling similar situations. Community watch groups sprang up across different neighborhoods. Residents who had barely known each other before now gathered regularly, sharing information and looking out for suspicious activities. The wealthy areas where the girl had babysit faced particular scrutiny, with neighbors finally breaking down the walls of privacy that had allowed criminal activities to flourish. Religious leaders and community organizers came together, creating support networks for families affected by trafficking. They established counseling services, support groups, and educational programs. The girls' actions had shown them that their community needed to be more connected, more aware, and more proactive in protecting its most vulnerable members. The local police department received numerous tips from citizens who had noticed suspicious activities but had previously hesitated to report them. Each tip was carefully investigated, leading to several smaller but significant arrests. The community had learned the importance of speaking up, inspired by the courage of one young girl. Social workers reported an increase in calls from concerned citizens. People who might have once looked the other way now felt empowered to report suspicious activities. The girl's story had shown them that taking action, even when uncertain, could make a crucial difference. Local businesses joined the effort, offering their support in various ways. Security companies provided free assessments to schools and community centers. Transportation companies trained their drivers to recognize signs of trafficking. Even small shops began posting awareness information and emergency contact numbers. The girl's school, though careful to protect her privacy, saw positive changes. Students began showing more interest in community service and social justice issues. The school counselor noticed more students coming forward to report concerns about classmates or situations they had witnessed. The atmosphere of awareness and responsibility grew stronger each day. A local artist created a public mural celebrating childhood courage and community vigilance, inspired by the story but carefully avoiding any identifying details. The artwork became a gathering point for the community, a reminder of how one person's brave actions could inspire positive change. As weeks passed, the City Council passed new regulations requiring better screening of childcare workers and improved monitoring of suspicious activities. Property owners faced stricter oversight, especially in areas where trafficking had occurred. The girls' observations had exposed weaknesses in the system that could now be addressed. The story reached state legislators, who began working on stronger laws to protect children and prevent trafficking. Policymakers consulted with experts, learning from the case about how seemingly normal neighborhoods could hide dangerous operations. The girls' experience helped shape legislation that would protect future generations. 1 year had passed since that fateful night at the hospital. The impact of the young girl's actions continued to create positive changes throughout the city and beyond. Her story, while protecting her privacy, had become a powerful example of how one person's courage could transform an entire community. In the hospital where it all began, a new wing dedicated to child protection services opened its doors. The protocols developed after that night had become a model for other hospitals across the country. Emergency room staff now had better training in recognizing signs of trafficking, and new procedures were in place to handle similar situations. The girl herself had grown stronger and more confident. Though her identity remained protected, she worked with counselors to process her experience. Her mother had watched proudly as her daughter turned her experience into something positive, speaking anonymously to other children about trusting their instincts and finding safe ways to report concerns. The baby she had saved that night was thriving with its reunited family. Though the girl never met them again in person, she received occasional updates through the detective who had worked her case. Each update reminded her that her decision to act had changed not just one life, but many. Law enforcement reported significant changes in how communities responded to suspicious activities. Tips from observant citizens had increased dramatically. People no longer ignored their instincts about strange situations, remembering how a 12-year-old's observations had uncovered a criminal network that adults had overlooked. Schools across the country began incorporating elements of the story into their safety awareness programs. Children learned about the importance of paying attention to their surroundings and speaking up when something seemed wrong. The message was clear. Age doesn't determine who can make a difference. The detective who had handled the case often used it as a teaching example in police training sessions. She emphasized how the simple observations of a child, things adults might dismiss as unimportant, had provided crucial details that solved a complex case. Her presentations reminded officers to listen carefully to young witnesses. Local community groups continued their increased vigilance. Neighborhood watch programs flourished, and people looked out for each other's children with greater awareness. The wealthy neighborhoods where the trafficking had occurred saw the biggest changes, with residents breaking down the walls of privacy that had once hidden criminal activities. The girl's mother had become an advocate for community safety, speaking at events about the importance of teaching children to trust their instincts. She never revealed her daughter's identity but shared how proud she was of her child's courage and quick thinking. Research organizations studied the case, analyzing how a young person's perspective had been crucial to uncovering criminal activity. Their findings led to new recommendations for law enforcement and social services about including children's observations in investigations. The social worker who had first interviewed the girl now trained others in her field, teaching them to pay special attention to details that children report. Her experiences had shown how young people often notice things that adults miss and how their simple observations can uncover complex situations. A year after the events, the hospital staff who had been present that night gathered for a quiet celebration. They remembered the young girl's bravery and how her actions had started a chain of events that made their community safer. Though she wasn't present, her impact was felt in every positive change they discussed. The legacy of that night continued to grow. Other cities adopted similar programs and protocols, creating a nationwide network of more vigilant communities. The story served as a reminder that heroes come in all sizes and that courage knows no age limit. As the sun set on the anniversary of that remarkable night, the city had changed in countless positive ways. The young girl who had carried a baby to safety had not just saved one life, she had created a wave of change that continued to protect children and strengthen communities. Her courage had shown that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference when it speaks up for what's right. The story of the 12-year-old girl and the baby she saved became more than just a tale of rescue. It became a lesson in courage, a reminder of the power of observation, and proof that anyone, regardless of age, can change the world for the better.